Good evening. Have y'all ever heard of leaven or yeast before? Have you ever had fresh bread? My wife's been making fresh bread the last few weeks, some in our house, and homemade, whole wheat, and I love it out of the oven with a little butter on it. You know, but when she first started making fresh bread, something happened occasionally. If the yeast balance isn't just right, the bread doesn't necessarily rise, and then you have a really dense, thick piece of decent tasting stone. And it's been a long time since she's ever had any of those issues with cooking. Some people may still resonate with what I'm saying, but leaven is a key ingredient. What happens when leaven's present is things rise, and you can have it's just a tiny bit, and it affects the whole loaf of bread, or however big your loaf is. And it's a fascinating thing. And this is not a new concept. Yeast or leaven has been around for generations, thousands of years. And Jesus talks about leaven in a very unique way in Luke chapter 12. It's interesting to me that he's just finished in Luke chapter 11 at the end, kind of chiding the Pharisees. He says, "Woe to you, Pharisees and lawyers and other people." This is one of the most quoted verses in that section. He says, "Woe to you, Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and every herb, and yet you neglect justice and the love of God. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others." And then he says, "Woe to you, Pharisees and scribes, woe to you, lawyers." He keeps going. Kind of gets pretty harsh with them, to be honest with you. But it's harsh because they aren't living into the realities of why they're doing these things, where their heart is, and living out the love of God by doing it in such a way that they tithe properly in these things, because it's to honor God out of a love for Him. He gets some of this. He's going after them, and at the very end of that section, it actually says, hear this: "As he went away, the scribes and Pharisees began to press him and to provoke him to speak about things, lying in wait for him to catch him in something he might say." Now they're trying to go after him after this. The very next thing that happens is Jesus is around this group of people, thousands, and he says, "Beware of the Pharisees' leaven, which is hypocrisy." Hypocrisy. That word in the Greek, to put on a mask, is what they used in plays, You picture a Shakespearean, someone wearing a mask. You're pretending to be someone you're really not. The Pharisees pretending to be something or someone they're really not. This is the leaven. What does that tell you? That tells you that pretending to be a God-fearer, a God-follower, and not doing it, that's actually contagious. It affects everyone around you. That's what leaven does, right? It affects the whole thing. So when you are a hypocrite, or when I am a hypocrite, if that were to happen, that's going to affect the whole loaf of bread. It's going to affect the whole thing. Have you ever thought about it that way? It's one way to think about the Pharisees as hypocrites. It's another thing to think about hypocrisy as leaven. How many people in the church don't live out their faith, and that affects all the people in their circle, and others maybe who don't follow Jesus because they don't see you really following Jesus. And then he closes this little section right there in chapter 12, right after he said this about the leaven. It says, "Whatever you have said in the dark shall be heard in the light. What you've whispered in private rooms shall be proclaimed in the housetops." Because what Jesus is saying, no, it's not about wearing a mask. That is contagious, and it affects everyone around you, and it can ruin your ministry. You know what, though? Here's the reality. All of that, he warns, everything done in the dark, everything done in private, everything that you really stand for at the core of the heart of who you are, that's going to come out. It's going to come out in the light. It's going to be shouted from the mountaintops. It's going to happen because God knows it, and you're going to have to answer for who you really are. So what is the leaven in your life today? Are you being a hypocrite and allowing that to affect people you come in contact with, your ministry, your lifestyle? Or maybe you're being the small mustard seed of the kingdom of God, where it's just planted and then it grows and it bears more and more fruit. And the leaven that you are, the people you're affecting, maybe it's not hypocrisy, but faith and the love of God. That's my prayer for us. That's my prayer for you.